In the shadowy corners of power and influence, where the lines between truth and deception blur, lies a world that few dare to explore. Join us as we venture into the labyrinth of the unspoken, the hidden, the deliberately obscured. We shine a light on the dogma that's been fed to the masses, unmasking the intricate web of deception spun by those who wish to control you. Welcome to Beyond Undisclosed. The truth is waiting.
Water, and she hobbled down, which would have probably been a 3 or 4 hour trek. I don't know if they had donkeys or exactly, or if they had Sherpas or what the story was, but she took him down to the bottom of the hill. And at the bottom of the hill, he stood upright. He said, "You have great compassion. I am not a lame renunciant." And they dematerialized, and he took her to Venus, and she became what is called a dual citizen. Now, I believe she probably spent time up there. She came back to India and lived her life. And when she was old, she went through a translation like the woman on the left. Now, this woman had been quite a heartfelt, compassionate woman working, and she was working in the 1950s in the giant rock and the extraterrestrial contacts with Gabriel Green, George Adamski, George Van Tassel, Orphalengio Avellucci, Buck Nelson, Dr. Frank Stranges, Bob Short, many, many others, Dan Fry, and she was about 50 years old. She was living in Williams, Arizona. She was quite an artist. So you see here, at the age of 50, she was taken out of her bed in a transport beam and kept safe beneath the spaceship. And she was transported from Arizona over the coast of California and an ocean there. If you could mute, I hear your voice there. So anyway, so she was transported over California, and she there was a space platform over the ocean hovering, and she couldn't believe it, and she was dropped down from below the spaceship to this platform outside in the middle of the ocean. She's there briefly for a few minutes, and the spaceship comes down and lands next to her. She's invited on board the ship by a very tall Venusian. His name is Vorton. It stands for Venusian Observation Ranger. It was more like captain, I guess you would call it. And from this experience, she was taken down. So let me go back. I'm sorry. It keeps going back on me. So they got on board the spaceship, and she was a little trepidatious, and he said, and she was surprised they go underneath the ocean. So they go underneath the ocean, and the ship tilts down at a 45-degree angle. And at the front of the ship, underneath the area, the front of the ship there, this ship is, I think it's a cigar-shaped ship, so it's not a typical circular saucer. These are 145 yards long, and they have various levels. I don't know how high they are, but they can carry a lot of people. And this is where they come in these ships, and they release their scout ships into the atmosphere. So she was on this ship, and he goes down, and she notices that the ship is pushing back the ocean, and she can see the dry floor. He goes, "Would you like to go outside and walk around?" She goes, "Well, okay." So he goes down, they open the hatch, and they're walking in front of the ship about 20 or 30 feet, and the ship is opening like the Red Sea, plowing open a space and drying the ground, and they're walking along the ocean's floor. and there's like a jellyfish comes out, and there is a octopus who comes out and kind of grabs around her leg. He took out a little stun gun and stunned it, and it went away. And she looks up at the disc. She goes, "What's that?" And he says, kind of goes, "Well, I don't know. Let's check." He knew what was there. They walked over. It was a spaceship, or not a spaceship, a Spanish galleon that had crashed. And he goes, "You want to go inside?" So they push the thing in. They're in there, and they're in this underwater inside the Spanish galleon. And there's a bunch of gold and rubies and fancy stuff that they had stolen from either Mexico or South America. And he's like that. And she goes, "Oh, wow, that's interesting." And he goes, "Okay, let's go." So they turn around and they walk away. And she's a couple feet away. And she goes, "Hey, aren't you going to get the gold? Aren't you going to grab that?" And he goes, "No, we have replicators for that." What they were doing was they were testing her heart. Was she focused on material needs and wants and desires? Okay? She passed the test, and she was taken to the moon base in 1957. Okay? Now, here is a beautiful Queen of Venus. I have not met her yet. You're going to hear her voice shortly. Her name is Lady Order. She ascended to Venus in a miracle of translation like those other two women. And this is a way that Venusians ascend people from Earth. They test them out, and they take them up there, and then they eventually will become part of the angel force, and they will not die. And I'll share that with you in a minute, too. So she was born in 1585. Her parents lived in the Basque region of France. Her name was Katerina, and she was tired of being a scullery maid. And at the age of 15, she stole a candlestick, and because she had been sewing since the age of 7, creating habits and hats and whatever for the priest and the nun, she was like a slave. She stole a candlestick, cut her hair, dressed as a boy, and escaped. Her plan was to go to Barcelona to join her brother, who was a conquistador living in Peru. So she had had enough of the church, and she was on her way. While she was in a barnyard loft in the evening, an angel appeared to her, kind of fancy pants. He showed up with sparkling light, lightning crackling, and said, "Katerina, the authorities are after you." He says, I know of your plans to go to South America." And he said, "Continue to dress as a boy, travel only at night, but take the southern route. When you get there, confess that I have visited to you in the name of our Lord, and he will help you." So she did that, and the priest believes her, and he tells her to continue to dress as a boy, and that he was leaving in 2 or 2.5 years to Peru, and she was to be part of his security force. So she continued to dress as a boy. Her breasts aren't that big, but she did the cover-up thing, and they get to Spain. She trained in the lance, the knife, the short sword, and the long sword, and the mace. So she was kind of like a special security detachment for the Pope himself, or not the Pope, the Monsignor, or whoever he was. I think that's in the books that you can read. So now one of the conquistadors figures out that she's a woman and tries to rape her. You have a right to kill someone if they're going to kill you or in the protection of an innocent. Okay? So, unfortunately, like, all the military guys there are taking orders from, Captain Calley to massacre the people. They said, "Well, who's going to go massacre with Captain Calley?" Well, he said he ordered us to do that. We have to do it. Well, okay. Well, who doesn't want to go? And then I would have shot every other person there and said that they were killed by the Vietnamese, because these people were killing innocent civilians. War is war, but you have a right to protect the innocent. And that's my personal view. War is an evil institution. It's been created by fallen beings, and mankind has been hoodwinked. I am a patriot for all countries in the world and for the freedom and the right of people to live and choose. This is a famous contact, the first one that took place in Desert Center with this gentleman named George Adamski. He was a Polish man, and he lived at Mount Palomar, and he had a telescope. And he was guided by some other contactees and spiritual people who were in communication with spaceships and having telepathic communications along with sightings. And she landed in a very famous thing. It was written by one of the relatives, I think, of the royal family, named Desmond Leslie. So he wrote a book called The Saucers Have Landed, because they've been seeing a lot of them, right? And of course, there were other things going on before. This is 1952. I knew another contactee who had experience in the 40s. That's another position. So when she landed, of course, she spoke English with a Spanish accent, and being a Venusian who had translated to, actually I should go back. So she found out, after she was raped, after she killed the military guy, sorry, I skipped ahead, she ran to the Monsignor on the church, and the military was after her. Like 5 minutes later, they came running to get that girl out here. We're going to hang her up. She killed someone. He said, "This is holy ground." The church had more power than the military. He said, "Stand back. I'm writing a letter to the Pope." She was trying to be raped. And the military officer, or whoever was, said, "I'm writing a letter to the Pope." So they wrote a letter to the Pope. What did it take back then? 4 months to get there? 5 months? So she writes a letter to the Pope. He writes a letter to the Pope. The general writes a letter to her Pope. 8 months later, she had to live like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, living inside the church for 8 months. And the Pope told the general, "You do not touch a hair on that woman's head. I want her protected. I want her in, you're going to move your first mate into other quarters. She's going to be taken care of. You treat her like a VIP. If she has any reports, it will be your head." So she went, she spoke to the Pope. He believes her story, and she walked out of that meeting with a papal scroll, probably the first ever military police order, that she created a cadre of both conquistadors made of women and men to police the rampant actions of the conquistadors in their raping and pillaging of the innocent natives in Peru. So now we come up, however many years later, she realizes she's not aging. What do you do? Of course, she removed herself from that current mission, and maybe she traveled the world, who knows, but she constantly kept coming back to the Catholic mission, which was, as we know, a Vatican gold Spanish conquistador land grab. However, the teachings and the message of Christ are true, just as though the Venusians work with individuals in understanding the message of Christ, but not always supporting the churches and all that nonsense that's going on. So there's a lot of things that I can explain there with my esoteric knowledge and my lifetimes of experience. So what happened was, she would appear, and she kept following the Father's missions all the way up from Peru, Central America, into Mexico, all the way up into California. Can you imagine? She was an invaluable asset from the year, 1603 until 1830. So 227 years she had been speaking the native languages, connecting with them with her beautiful soul and spirit. And unfortunately, I'm sure the conquistadors betrayed her, but she became smart enough with that to keep her mission with the priests, who were mostly well intended, though, as all priests are, bully boys, like all police generally are. They have the protect and serve, and then you have the BBs, the bully boys, who just want to exert their power over people and do unlawful actions for people to respect their authority. That's all going to be changing, folks, very rapidly. There's a lot of changes coming, and I want to give you positive thoughts of what's coming up for the earth. So eventually in 1830, she comes upon a fur trapper near Solano, California. She's already gone past the mission in San Juan Capistrano, near where I live, where the doves come back every year. She's gone past the Santa Barbara mission. Now she's up in Solano, California. There's a mission being established by the father there in San Francisco, whoever that was. Maybe it was Junipero Sierra. I know he came up through the Sacramento River Valley, and he was sowing mustard seeds, so if they ever got lost, they could always find a trail back. Anyway, so he's down there, and the church had said, find out what the Russians are doing there. And he was a Russian fur trapper, and he starts to tell her about where I live, Mount Shasta, the beautiful mountain. And he starts saying, there's a lot of stories, lights in the sky. There's stories of fate, of little fairies, little people. There are mysterious things, and here she is. She's 245 years old, and she doesn't even know why she's living so long. She knows she's not a vampire, but she's living really long. Cool, right? So he says, Mount Shasta is interesting. He planted the seed. She goes back to the church, and a day or two later, she has 2 horses. The one horse was lightly packed, and 4 mules. So she left with a trade of 6 horses that she would trade off riding, and the mules, and they came up to Mount Shasta. She finds herself in some meadow. I don't know. A lot of people would like to think it's Panther Meadows. Maybe it was. But she was there at this meadow, and there was the same fur trapper. This time he didn't have any fur trapping cages. And she's up there, and he's smiling. He didn't have any animals in the cages before either. And all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, he transforms himself into the angel she met. And for you Christians who are still holding on to the conversation, this angel was known as the accidental apostle. Okay? He's the one that died with Christ on the cross. He said some kind words. He was known as the good thief. He was robbing from the caravans to feed the downtrodden and the homeless with Simon the Zealot, and acting as a Robin Hood and taking some money for the local people who, while watching all the wealth go by for trading in Jerusalem. He ended up dying with Christ on the cross, and Christ said, you will be with me this day in paradise. He became an ascended master, and Christ actually appointed him in his stead as the regent of Venus. There is a royal court made of both males and females, though they have a queen. And again, it's not genetic. It's based on lifetimes of love and service. And she has maintained her memory, and I believe this is why she has been named the queen, because she's lived on Earth for all these years. She's seen every aspect of Earth culture and society. She clearly speaks all of the languages. So in 2012, she had already met my friend Raymond Keller. I'll go into that story. But she was appointed the Queen of Venus on December 12th in a very large stadium with over 100,000 people. We'll get into that. So here we go. I want to give the good stuff, and I'll explain about all that stuff. So here's a picture of one of the first contactees that came out to the public in modern day. This is, of course, the Venusians stepped up their contact. They've been here, as Aphrodite in the Greek gods. They, lots of stories I could tell about their history here. But he was guided by some other contactees. There were 6 of them, and he was alone, was to go meet. And a cigar-shaped mother craft appeared, and two ships stayed hovered in the air, and one came on the ground. And out stepped a man as security. One stayed inside the craft, and this woman that you saw, that you're going to see again, stepped out. And she said, through her universal translator, she did not reveal her language. She wanted to see his heart and see where he was in his consciousness and what his thinking was. Okay? But the first day, she said, tell them I'm a man, because our psychologists feel that you guys can't accept a woman in a position of authority in 19, if yeah, we'll get into that. Let's, I don't want to digress from this, if you don't mind. We'll answer all these questions probably in the next show. So we've got time. So here's the Queen. In 1954, after speaking through the Universal Translator, she became good friends with him and wanted to support him in his talks. She actually came to one of his talks at Mount Palomar, and she arrived with a Martian in the glasses here. It's looking funny because of the shade from the sun, but his name was Firkan, and this other guy, his eyes in the shade, it was a bright sunny day, was Ramu. You can see she's kind of closing her eyes. It looks like the guy, yeah, the guy's standing in the sun. So we got some stuff going on there. So you see, notice these sandals here. She wears these sandals on Venus. She still wears them to the day, not the same pair. But she's holding in her hand a little device. This is called a nimbus. This picture here, you're not going to believe it, but I showed you that other picture. This picture was taken when they were on Venus, when Raymond wrote his third book. And I think I have that picture here again. So this is a picture. He took this picture is from a newspaper in Los Angeles in 1954. This is some secret agent spy stuff. The Venusians serving the Earth without fanfare, not beating their chests in a silver spaceship, not using their powers for anything nefarious, but kindly, gently converting people to random acts of kindness, one act at a time, and to follow the teachings of the actual message of Jesus Christ. Forget the 10 commandments. I got 2. Love God with all your heart. Love your fellow man. See God in everyone and everything. And to do unto others as you would have done unto you. Believe me, they're not into the endless laws and ordinances and the dogma of the church. But they very much know what happened with Christ. The gentleman I met, as we move along in our thing, if you allow that or go forward, we will hear from Alon, the security chief, who was present during Christ's time on earth, and he was also one of the Magi at his birth. Here we have a picture of Raymond Keller when he was a young man. He had a UFO contact experience. It was very exciting for him, and he became a editor of a flying saucer magazine. He was known as creating several very powerful UFO groups that had letter correspondence and newsletters around the world when he was 16 and 18. He was the student body secretary. He editor of the school newspaper. He also worked in 3 branches of the military, in the Navy, and the Air Force. He was the main secretary at the Top Gun School in Miramar. And this woman came to him and under the name of Dolores Barrios. And this picture, he's 18, and she's what, 400 and something, right? She's pretending to be a Brazilian journalist, and she met another guy a guy that I met, and I can show those pictures in future shows. So Gabriel Green, I met him. This guy had spaceships land in front of me. A lot of phenomenon occurred around him. I'll just say he's kind of like, you have guys like James Collier and Louis Martens. James Collier, James Gilliland. He has a ranch, and UFOs show up there regularly. There's another guy who's, I'll say, quite a bit more advanced than James Gilliland in terms of his knowledge and his experience. named Louis Martens. He'll be coming to my conference. He's a South American contactee. He's been taken to Ganymede. He's been taken to Venus. He's been taken to the inner Earth, breakaway civilizations, and the Great White Brotherhood, those who guard the planet against the fallen ones. All that's changing now. But Gabriel Green was very personal. I had a lot of amazing things that go beyond what you would believe, and I took them in stride. And I did not bat an eye because I've had these experiences prior to meeting him. This picture, as I told you before, Raymond Keller was sitting in this little time probe on the surface of Venus, and they were looking into the Earth. She said, he had been able to look at what they call the Akashic records. They have a technology, and he would be able to pull up any time frame or anywhere in time and space, and he could look at the history of the Earth like a holographic movie. So he looked at his own lifetime first. He looked at his first lifetime, and his first lifetime was as the poet scribe for the first Caesar. He was the poet scribe Publius Virgil Moro. And in that lifetime, as Caesar wrote it, he put it down. He also wrote the Aeneid about the founding of Rome. He would publish the decrees, they be post, and whatever the Senate and Caesar said would be read aloud at the square for those who couldn't read. And their intention, as being guided by and inspired by the Venusians, was to create the true society, just as they did in the city of Troy, which was guarding some major portals. They succumbed to the false Trojan horse, and the dark forces took over that portal, and Troy was disbanded. They also worked with the Greeks, and I'll tell that story a little bit later if you like, but here they're working with Romans clandestinely. And Raymond Keller met on the hills. If you go to the history of the poet Virgil, he met a woman her name was Lady Ankara. And she introduced to him. Eventually, they became lovers, and he was taken to Venus in that lifetime. So now I'm going to tell about this little time travel. So they're up there on Venus. It's towards the end of his 10 weeks on Venus, and he's looking at the history coin. She said, would you like to go with me and go back into the past? He could look at the past, but he couldn't do a kind of a virtual time thing. So they sat in this time temple where you see here, this little bubble, and the queen chose a date and time, probably somewhat like Back to the Future, but it wasn't that technology. It was actually done on the technology that Raymond had. Now, you have to be an advanced adept in your mental being to be able to use this technology. So you can see in the picture, middle picture, he's holding the nimbus, it's called. Harry Potter talks about it because the nimbus is actually a little circle. You see that picture and you saw the other one. For the Venusians, it's a little smaller. He has something that looks like something. I can't talk about that. So they're looking there, and he's piloting it. And even though they're sitting stationary on Venus, it's like a virtual bilocation signal. She says, take it down to 1,000 feet. So he takes it down to 1,000 feet, and then she goes, uh-oh. And he says, what do you mean? He goes, take it back up. And as he said, take it back up, this device started to rock and shake and broke up. And this is what really happened. This is a picture taken in 1954. But in our timeline, this picture was not possible. So now we're talking about time travel, advanced technologies. The revelation of Dr. Raymond Keller and what I'm revealing to the world is going to blast a lot of people's realities. And a lot of people don't believe it. They call me a fake and a fraud. I am not such. And eventually, people will recognize that. I'm to share a spiritual message and to report these truths exactly as they are, and people will understand them. There is a spiritual message and a warning that's coming, and I'm not sure where that is. So this is the time crash, and when they landed, as they were landing, as the ship broke apart, she said, take my hand. He took her hand. He said, grab your nimbus. He pulled the nimbus out. The ship fell around them, kind of like they were ejected, but it broke up around them, and they're at 1,000 feet. They landed with her mental powers. They landed like goddamn Superman. And the people were believers in the UFO contactees. They said, "We knew you'd come." They didn't plan on coming, and they didn't originally. But here they came, and they landed like Superman. Raymond has a great sense of humor, and they said, "What's your name?" And Raymond says, "Corel." That's Superman's uncle. Supergirl hasn't even been invented yet. Now, check this out. The Queen said, "Listen, hold that photo for 5 years. Do not release it, and please don't tell anyone that I've come from Venus," right? Well, this description was given to the creator in 1959 when the creator, Otto Binder, created Supergirl. So literally, the Queen of Venus was the inspiration in a time travel mishap for Supergirl. Note the sandals again. In 2013, she's wearing the same sandals. You can see he's wearing, it looks like a propeller, but that's the symbol of the Metrons, or the time temple lords on Venus. They monitor time because there are people interfering with the flow of time, and the Venusians monitor that and protect that for this solar system. So there's some amazing stories here. I can't make this up, but it's true. So this is the message I was going to play for you before, and now you're going to hear.
Dear friends